I'd like to introduce Akbarnazim Modan. Is a community architect and has over the last decade worked on post-disaster contexts in Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Kashmir, Iraq, Serbia, Haiti and Philippines. His particular interest lies in built heritage and communities' own practices. He trained as an architect at SEPTA Ahmedabad and holds an MA in International Architectural Regeneration from Oxford Brookes University, UK. Anna Wachtmeister aims to ensure that the architectural process empowers communities through participation in planning and construction. For more than a decade, she has worked and lived in more than 10 cities as diverse as Cairo, Nairobi, Port-au-Prince, and Erbil. Cities that are going through a rapid change, either because of irregular urbanization or due to recent disaster. Anna trained as an architect in the UK. Anna and Akbar currently work for the municipality of the city, Malmö, Sweden, where they are experimenting with new ways of citizens' participation in urban planning.
Can you hear me without the mic? It's okay?
Or do we need
Otherwise,
for recording? Do you need for recording? Yeah. Yeah.
Better?
We are actually recording for circulating it among all the colleges.
Okay. Yeah.
Please help me to talk through the mic because I'm not very used to it. So first of all, India, for me, is a place of unexpected encounters. So every time I come to India, I'm flabbergasted about the encounters that I have here, just like this one. We did not know that we would all meet just a week ago, and we had this fantastic invitation, and we said yes straight away. We're very happy that we said yes. We've had a fantastic day. Thank you very much. So first of all, Akbar and me will introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about when we were students and how we ended up working, where we work now, and how we work now. So when I was an architecture student, back in the UK, maybe some more than 10 years ago now, the more I studied architecture, the more I entered into a smaller and smaller architectural bubble. And I was thinking, my world is, even though my mind is expanding, it's not in correlation with my bubble. My bubble, I felt, was getting smaller and smaller. And even my final course at university kind of made me realize this, because our final course at university, our tutors told us, you know the language that you've been using at architecture school? It's not useful when outside of school, when you have to talk to your clients or when you have to talk to your engineers. So we had a whole course in de-learning the language that we had learned to become aware of the world that we were in, the architectural world that we were in. Knowing this, I became very interested in how the profession, so I was professionalizing myself, becoming an architect, getting very specific knowledge, and my relationship to the layman, my relationship to people who were building also. How do I communicate? How do I collaborate with people outside of my very specific profession? And not just with other professionals, but specifically with people who build themselves. So people who build whole communities by themselves in informal settlements in urban areas. And I was specifically interested in people living in slum areas, so informal settlements. So moving away from Europe, I moved to Cairo, and since then I've worked with people living in informal urban settlements around the world, always experimenting with how can we collaborate. Hence, I've started working in participatory architectural processes.
So my story is also started at a school of architecture. In 2001, there was an event which changed my life, personal life and the professional life, both. There was an earthquake in Gujarat. I was a first year student in architecture school, and there was a really, really bad earthquake which destroyed the fabric which we relate every day in the city. Very much the social structure also was disturbed. That event, which is earthquake, actually became my driving force for developing who I am today. So that earthquake also made me question that how could built environment which is made to protect people, but also it becomes the fundamental thing which destroys the lives also. The disaster don't kill people. It's a building which kills the people. So if you are in an earthquake, you are in an inside building or outside building, it makes a lot of difference to your life. So that question hung around me, and as a student we were involved doing some damage assessment and also doing the temporary shelter for the community. So we designed tent-site structure, and we were active on the ground as a student, and we did a lot of work and during the studies as well. But the one question hung around through that, see the things which I saw, which hung around me. So the old city of Ahmedabad, which is constructed with the wooden buildings, some of you might know, and the new part of the city is a regular concrete building, and some of the failure of building were in the new part of Ahmedabad where concrete building failed to behave, which they didn't design to behave in an earthquake. So I did my thesis on that question, how we can learn from wooden buildings, which are flexible, which can move with the earthquake, which can take the energy and dissipate the energy within the structure, how we can learn from it, and what we can learn from that wooden building, and how we can apply. So I did my thesis under Professor Chaya, and that was kind of a very complicated subject as well, because a lot of people didn't have idea how the traditional building behaves. You can't model that because it's very unpredictable. And wood is different, and every wood is different, every wood behaves differently. So that was kind of my my search, and that continued my search of how the community participation can be driving force in a reconstruction. So I did my master at Oxford Brookes, and I did my thesis on that subject, how owner-driven housing compared to donor-driven housing, how the housing process can become actually the centerpiece of rebuilding the lives, not just the physical structure, how the community can stand back to their feet. So that was my kind of thesis. So I'm just talking about my academic little path, and that actually bring me to different part of the world where it was disaster like Haiti. After earthquake, I went 2 years. I was working there in Haiti after disaster, and also Philippines after typhoon. I was working there, and also that also bring me different places like Iraq, northern Iraq, where we met each other 10 years ago. And then we were working on the rebuilding of after war, and also Serbia I worked. So different places and different type of work, and always we were not only architecture firm, but always we had a different roles. We will talk about it later on. Yeah. But, this photo is from Erbil, where we were working on the 6,000-year-old citadel. I was working on UNESCO project as a consultant, and it was like a to-do master plan for World Heritage Site. So they wanted to convert this 6,000-year-old citadel to have a World Heritage Site. So we were there documenting and proposing things how it can be. And you can see the informal city here, which is built by people, and there's a formal, like which is designed by architect and engineers. So you can see the world in the reality. Actually, there's a huge amount of architecture. It's built and designed by people, and there's a few amount which we talk in architecture. Which is so a lot of people in Africa, in Asia, and majority of the world, South America, it's people who build their houses by themselves. And so that's kind of just to contrast, showing that.
Yeah. Places where we worked. Maybe you can do it. The next one. This is in Caracas, in South America. Just to give you an idea of what type of communities we've worked with. This is in the Philippines. And this is the question that Akbarnazim always bear close to our heart. When we talk about participatory processes in architecture, participation in architecture is often thought of the way to make sure that whatever is being constructed is according to the end user's needs. Therefore, there needs to be a high level of participation. So you invite people into your design process as far as this is possible. And Akbarnazim, we like to turn this on its head. Is it really the people that should be part of our processes? Or in how far can we be part of the community's process? And how far can we plug ourselves into community's own reconstruction process? And this is something that we both use in our own practice to guide ourselves and also the people that we work with. It puts you in a very different position as an architect. It's about taking a step back, as far back as you can, but always being ready to take the lead if necessary. So our role is kind of threefold. We would say we're community architects because we see the community that usually builds by themselves without a professional, as our clients. Even though maybe someone else is employed us, someone else is paying our salary, or someone else is paying for the actual construction. As far as possible, we see the community as our client. We're also process managers. The process is never, we don't talk so much about projects, it's more a process. And in this process, there is diversity of different stakeholders involved. There's usually a governmental agency or the municipality. There's often what we would call the donor, someone who finances the project, who's dominant but absent. And then the community. Therefore, we also say that we're brokers. We're brokers between the more influential actors, the decision makers, and maybe the more marginalized. So people who live in slum areas are often not voices that are heard very loudly. And we see ourselves as the brokers between these more influential actors and the more marginalized actors. So we go in between these three roles. We meander between these three roles.
Yeah. So we discussed about how we present our work. So I think we can start with a bit more practical, more what you guys doing. So yesterday you guys went to the site and you did amazing work in half a day, and today you saw the results. But tomorrow you're going to this is a difficult context where you don't have that much easy access to the built environment or community. So we're going to talk about a little bit this continuous revisiting in terms of physical revisit, but it is very much fundamental to understand complex context and community. So how one can do that. And some of the things you already have started in your workshop, already looking at So we are going to go through a little bit and then explain a little bit. It is some of the tools we use it on the site or how we do it. So maybe you can take next slide. So some of the part already you have tools you have already have used on site. So we're going to cover others as well. But this is the continuous process that's very important. So community is not a stagnant group of people. They always are different. And when you talk to one, and other will say something else. So it's always a diversity and always so keep in your mind, a community is not a monolithic group of people. They are all different. So we're going to go through some of the examples from my work. So I was working as a researcher at World Habitat Research Center in Suspi. So some of the work I have done in Gujarat post-disaster reconstruction, adaptation, so how people have adapted. So we're going to go through a little bit here in tool frameworks. Yeah, you can take that. So looking is always very much, stand on that. So when you see something, we as an outsider, we don't have much more access to nuances on the site or something. So when you see a person like this, he's an old person, does not have a shade or workplace, he's a poorly guy, maybe he does not have enough money. So we always have this kind of feeling that, does he need a shop? Or what can I help? Or buy something from him. But next. When you look again, it's you see some of the things here. So this is very important, that how he has, he's working now. He's in a work environment where he does recycle, is a cooking oil container. He's making different products altogether. There are thousands behind and tools. So he's working already on the next product. So he's like a person who goes around the doors and he does make new product all the time, custom made for the family, what they want from their oil container. So oil container is the same for every community, but he innovates and makes something for what family needs. And I think that's a role of architect, that you create something, there is some needs. There's just a box, tin box, and you create something from that need, something that's useful or what they need. So this is, your role can be like first, next. So when you see a little more, again, that's like you see the skills, he's doing recycling, can have a successful entrepreneur. But then you think about it and looking again. So it's like there's an opportunity of partnership with this guy. Maybe he can, we can utilize local skill, or he can make building component from recycled material, or starting new vernacular, or have how to scale up this skills, or maybe having community construction laboratory where you taste new details, you work with it, you change it. So it's like a living lab there. You work with this, hands-on with these people like this. So when you look, you have to be really attentive on the site, and you need to find how I can use this potential into the next level. So you just not see as it is what it is, but you go beyond it. So that's just one example how the poorly elder can be actually a resource for your thinking, your design, or your program. So listening. So that's very important as well. Like you need to be really open and your ears. When you see this guy is kind of be angry at me, he's like pointing finger, and I'm ready to fight with him. But actually he's teaching me. He's teaching me proportion system. He uses for his carpentry. So he uses by hand how he uses his proportion system. So he's teaching me that how he uses. So he's a tool maker who makes the agriculture tools. And he has already have refined his technique, how to join with the wood and steel to make most out of it, the wood, and when they work in agriculture. So this is kind of very important that you learn, you build on existing. So how can I utilize these skills? How this local skill proportion system, I can use it it might be not visible in a first go, but there are proposal system, you can use it. So there are like invisible things when you talk to people. Then you learn from it. You don't go as an expert and I know better than you, but be humble and say, oh, what can I learn from you and how can I use this to next level? So that is kind of approach we needed on site as well. So you need to be really kind of, because this is what I'm saying here is the introducing new system. It has a pros and cons, but working on existing has much more empowering, because when you have a disaster, you already have lost family member or what you had belongings, everything is lost. And then the most worst thing you can do is you can tell that person that you are not useful anymore. You can't do anything. You just sit there, I'm going to do everything. You are useless. But rather than saying that you have something to give us, you can do something, and here what you do, how we can use it. And then it becomes empowerment. It's a really kind of psychological treatment in a way that for the post-disaster stress as well. Asking is like a third way. You don't just go and ask, you look and listen, then you need to ask. You have a semi-structured interview, have open questions, so never have a question which is not open, or people feel offended, or people don't feel want to answer, and never push people to answer if they want to answer. And also have carefully ask people, and also avoid value judgment question, maybe better to work in a group. So there are some tools, standard tools you can use also. And this is one of the tools is the focus group. So when I ask one person, that person is going to give me her or his version of the story. But when you have a group of people, different age or something, then that person will give that her or his version of story, but actually the other villager, they will correct him or add something. So that the conversation will actually become much more richer than talking to one person. Then you talk to different, and always there's a trend of adding something, and people never think that, sometimes it becomes like, oh, this is how it is, but actually the other person knows something which is not reality. So working with a group interview is always also good technique. Yeah. So there are some of the standard tools maybe you already have used. So mapping. So that first was kind of looking was like your looking, listening, you listening. So that involved someone else saying, then you listen. Third was you ask, so you intervene. And then fourth one is a mapping. So you do the participatory mapping. You don't just do your own mapping, but also you involve people in your mapping. That how, so it by interview or drawing together or different techniques, you can use it participatory way. So map capitals. So don't just map things are lacking. So there's always lacking things. There's 1,000 of things they don't have. They don't have internet. They don't have a highway. They don't have whatever. They don't have TV. So don't start to give a wish list. Then people will have a wish list. I want this or that, or I want this. So it's also the conversation also goes on the wrong way if you are so lucky. So there are like capital, so resources, like human resource. So someone has a skills like a carpenter or teacher, or someone is a bookkeeper. Also can be useful in a process. So like also like physical. So some of the land is available to work with, or some other, like someone has a rickshaw or boat. Also it is resource in a process where that person can bring the material and he can earn. So need to think about what are the capital. It's not just also social capital, for example, like a village church committee or temple committee or mosque committee. They actually, people are organized, very well organized, and they organize events and festivals. So how to work, like in Gujarat, they do Navratri, like a 9-day festival for dancing. But they have a really good skills to organize. So there are organizations, So within this social organization, you can work with. Maybe I'm not. The religious institutes are one thing, but there are schools you can use and other stuff. And so natural resources also how to use it. Like fallen coconut trees actually can become really resource. Like in the Philippines, we use like a lot of coconut trees were fallen down after typhoon, so we use it in a construction. So we had to set up the laboratory to find out which are the useful coconut or not, and how to use what is there, rather than bringing more material. So just capital in terms of not just the physical capital, but other capital as well. And also map over time. So I think you already have started, like how people use it. This is just one example. Like there are different colored women, men, and children use the same space in a different time of the day. So like when you go to the site, you might be in the morning, but actually you need to map how they use it in night or in a festival time. So you get the holistic understanding of how people use the spaces in a street, or this is just a house, but overall. So just map over time as well. And also like a seasonal mapping. So like in a fishing community would be different. Like also agriculture season will be different. So try to map things in a holistic way, like our event on a seasonal part as well. And like this is the tricky part. So now we have looked, listened, asked, and mapped. But the triangulation is the kind of key thing, I feel, because in a building measurement also, when you do the drawing, if you don't do the triangulation, is always not right. Your drawing is never right. So in this working with the community, always you ask questions and there are different answers to this, and then you need to triangulate. You need to find out the real thing. So this is like just a walk on the village, and then you find this woman waiting for the water, and then you will ask them, why are you waiting? So they will say, oh, I'm waiting for 3 hours, last 3 hours, there's no water. And then you will go back to your drawing board and say, oh, there's no water, and let's design the whole system about the water, and let's do this. Then you go further, and then you find out there's a water, and actually the problem is the pressure in the water, or the rich people taking away the water with that having the overhead tank. So then you find the next reality. So you go further in the village, and then you see this. You see this, someone is trucking the water. Somebody is already made the business out of that problem of community has. So, and then suddenly man is in charge. Until now the women were in charge when they had to carry the water. Now he's making money, so is a man in charge now. And then is it affordable? Is it government? So just be, it's not skeptical, but you need to be really observant. You need to be right, just don't take as a fact, but there's a layer and layer of what you're seeing. There is you need to go behind it, otherwise you will just go back to your drawing board and just design something they don't have water. Then you go further and you see this in the village where buffalo is having good time with the water. There's plenty of water here. Actually, the main problem is the leakage. So then you find out actually the water is there, but there's a leakage. So I'm just illustrating that when you triangulate, you need to go through different stages, different people, and there are trustworthy people, or like there are member of community you can triangulate with this as well. So like a panchayat member will have a different view, and people will have a different view, or the religious people have a different view. You go to teacher who does not live there but just come there as a teacher, they might have a different view. So you need to like triangulate the data, otherwise the data will be really loose and it can be very superficial or yeah. So what we learn is here like the scale, maybe the problem, maybe like it might be one neighborhood has a problem, not the whole village. So then you need to think that as well, like where is the problem and how people deal with the problem. So you don't just see the community as a passive, they're just waiting that water to come, but they already have dealt with the problem. Somebody has started business, somebody's doing something else, and buffalo is enjoying. So there's already movement. So don't just come with an intervention that I have a perfect intervention, but just see us more that how do you think you, or how did you did it before, or so something like that. And then go to the root cause of the problem and just we go further is the validation. And the validation, we had an amazing discussion this afternoon, but the ideally is the validation with the community. So what you have mapped and validate with the community. So it could be like a call a village meeting, a little bit, a different age group, different gender, and then validate your findings. You present that. So these are your clients. So when you work in a post-disaster context, so somebody gives the money, government gives money, or donor gives the money. That's, you have accountability for the money, of course, but actually they are not going to live there. Government officer is not going to live there. Community, the most vulnerable people are your clients. So how you work with it. So there are different methods you can work with it. So validate, so go back and then make the people, don't forget, people don't speak all the architecture language or English or different language. So you need to make it in a way that people can understand what you're finding. Yeah, so community presentations, so always this, how you can do it. There are different tools you can use it. And also like interact with the people, like having that rapport, that understanding that we are not the researcher who is like sucking the blood, you know. You just, the laboratory, they just take the blood and they make a report and then they just give you a report. But you are not a mosquito. You are you use them as a community. So you go back. These are the interviews we did, or these are the information we gathered. This is it. Like, so it is a very good gesture for community to see that what you have. They're spending time with you as well. So it's important to value that time as well. It's not just your time, it's their time as well. They might not have a job right now, or they're not studying, but it is valued. They might have a children to look after or something else to do. So don't see it as a like, be humble. That's the message. Yeah. So when you do your design brief, and also like there would be a lot of things would be on the table, on the drawing board, and say you need to prioritize. You can't do everything. So how are you going to prioritize? You need to prioritize with the community. You can't, unless otherwise it will become your vision, what they need. So then you need to go back maybe. Like, I'm not sure how much time you have, but this is kind of, you need to go back. So like you prioritize with the community. And also like assess what you have and what you need. Also it's important, like in terms of design brief. Then you work with that. So it becomes more real, that you don't just come up with your ideas, but also like understand what is there. Yeah. And then validate again. So you have your solid understanding of context. You have done your prioritization. You work with it. You think this kind of intervention can be useful, or how we can do it. And then also these are the design brief level, but also while you do the design, it's a similar process. You do participatory design with the people. And then like in Philippines, we did a kind of kit. So we made building elements. So people can, so everyone had the same amount of money, like $1,000 budget, but they could choose different elements, different material, and then there was Excel where everything like a BOQ. So it can be flexible, and also like people can choose and design their own houses with your, like a Lego. You can build a small Lego thing, and then you design with the people, and then they can move around things, and like it's more interactive process also. So I think Anna need to come back. Anna, I will go back. So Anna will. So this was just to add on what you guys are doing already. So just to give a little bit around before we go more to the site. And then Anna will talk about now one of the examples, what we have done in Haiti. So there's a lot to show and talk, but we could focus like one example, and then how, and this understanding, this circle is continuation, like because you're outsider and you will just build one layer. Kerala. You build the Canada. Okay, if you have any questions, yeah, before we move to next level, yeah, or we take it afterwards, or yeah, okay.
So I will talk a little bit about how, in our response, how we decide to respond. And how we decide to respond, we often encapsulate by this little saying, that we're crossing the bridge while we're walking the bridge. So we don't know what the bridge looks like when we start building it. We do know that we all want to end up on the other side of the river. This gives us somehow the courage to try things out while we're in the process of designing. It's important for us to prototype, to test while we're responding, not only for ourselves, but also for the community that we work with, to be able to learn with us and test with us. Not all community members can read plans, can read sections, understand the language that we speak, but through constructing together, we can learn together if this is the right direction or not. So we often say we're crossing the bridge together, walking the bridge together as we're building the bridge. I will talk about our response after the big earthquake in Haiti in 2010. It was a major earthquake because it hit the capital. It hit the capital of Haiti, Port-au-Prince. It was a strong earthquake, but it wasn't a particularly strong earthquake. But it had an enormous detrimental impact. To this day, we don't really know how many people lost their lives, but we know it's more than 200,000 people lost their lives in less than 5 minutes. And 1.5 million people became homeless in the same amount of time. And the city looked a bit like this afterwards. So what Akbar also mentioned in the beginning was that one of our key messages from we arrived as the international aid community. So Akbar and me were both working for international NGOs who recruited many architects and engineers to go and support the reconstruction. And this was our initial key message out to the community. Many people had different ideas about why people had lost their lives. But to really, the first key message that people really understood that it was the buildings that were badly constructed and that had taken the lives. So I'm not sure how much you know about Haiti. I did not know very much before I got on the plane. It's a city that's urbanized. Most Haitians live in cities. The cities are very dense. So a lot of people live on very small amount of land in the city, while a small amount of people in the city own a lot of land. So it's disproportionately divided. The services are minimal. So even though we were living in where the rich Haitians were living, our water was not connected to any mains. So it all came trucked. And we had pit latrines just like every other Haitian. There was no sewage system in the whole of the city. And also in Haiti, which causes a lot of challenges after disasters, is that there is no cadastre. So there's the land titling system, and who owns what piece of land is non-existent, or is at least very disputed. And then the few documents that did exist were destroyed during the earthquake. So you basically arrived in a city where there were no maps. So this is, so Haiti is a volcanic island, or half of a volcanic island, very hilly. And this is a typical view of the hillside there. The other thing from our point of view, from the international aid community's point of view, was that we had no direct experience with urban disasters. There's a lot of experience with rural disasters, but urban disasters of this magnitude, there was no precedent. So we really came knowing that there were many learnings to be had. So in the city, the presidential palace was destroyed. Half the homes of people were destroyed or beyond repair. This is the presidential palace. And this is one way the Haitian people responded, was to displace themselves to places where they felt safer. And these were the public spaces or the streets. This is response number one. Another response was by the international community to build temporary displacement camps where people moved to. And they were usually slightly outside of the city. Another response from the international community were temporary shelters, tea shelters. And the idea was that households were given these and they would last for about 3 years. And in these 3 years, people would get the money together, organize themselves to rebuild their homes. So they were temporary housing. Another response, this was the government's preferred response, was to displace people outside of the city. Thinking if we build new communities, we can get rid of the slums, the informality in our city. They were not so popular among the people who were supposed to live there, because they were purely housing. They hadn't thought about the community. They hadn't thought about livelihoods, they hadn't thought about transport, schooling, etc. It was a carpet of housing. So in the end, this housing that was built outside of the capital ended up being student accommodation. And then there was our response. So we came more with a community approach. We wanted to understand how people lived in Haiti. This is a vernacular, so a typical Haitian house. In Haiti, they believe in spirits and the importance in their homes. Right? The importance in the housing here was that there was at least 4 openings. Even though the house was very small, it was important that there would be at least 4 openings. 2 openings for the spirits to enter and 2 openings for the spirits to leave the house. And we analyzed and we looked at this and we responded to it by making an earthquake-proof version of it. And we built it in the community. This was our first interaction with the community in terms of our response. And we did it together with the community, with local masons, to really understand during the process of construction what the people were really, because everyone was very appreciative that were there. So whatever we would present to them or say that we could do for them, they would say, yes, please. But we didn't want the yes, please for handouts. We wanted to really understand what would be beneficial for them. So the idea of building together and hearing in between what they were saying about these buildings was important for us. And we built it in a modular format, so we could have it in different, on different plot sizes, etc. And we started placing it. Yeah. And here is my colleague here on the right, with community members deciding on how the different modules should come together, where the door should be, etc. Okay. And we started placing it in the community. As soon as we started placing it in the neighborhoods, everyone started shaking their heads. They weren't the right typology. But we had the pressure to build, so we had to continue building, because we only had 2 years for us to spend our budget, knowing that it wasn't the right response. It wasn't the right response for many reasons. The main reason was that people were reconstructing themselves. And they were reconstructing themselves the way that they wanted to live in the future. So we were too much on our own path, thinking that if we design something and then people can just respond to what we're designing, in the end we will find the right response. But actually, the people who were the main responders, the first responders, the largest portion of responders were the people themselves. And once again, we were reminded of who's involved in whose process here. We should be involved in the people's own reconstruction process. And it came even closer to me when one of my colleagues who was also a community member, came to me in urgency and said, Anna, you have to do something. Our engineers are spending their time on the wrong things. We're trying to perfect this shelter and this wooden structure. The people are responding themselves, and they're building a disaster. They're building exactly how they did before the earthquake. We need to at least send one engineer, at least. And this really made me think we need to be braver than we are. We need to really go into the people's processes here, into their psyche, into their response, and see what we can do with them, not for them. This is just to give you an illustration of what the neighborhoods looked like where we were working. So with this, we realized we needed a whole new typology. Not only were the plots where we were trying to fit this beautiful vernacular building into, they were irregular, they were small. On average, the plot size was 8 square meters and irregular. The expansion was upwards. The houses that we were placing there had no room for expansion. So as it's written here, the plot sizes were irregular. We weren't optimizing the spaces, because if the plot size was maybe L-formed, our building was rectangular only. It wasn't according to the people's needs, because they were rebuilding themselves. They weren't waiting for our buildings to arrive, showing that they had a capacity to rebuild themselves, but also maybe not the fullest interest in what we could be providing. We were breaking from the vernacular. Even though we were thinking that we were according to the Haitian vernacular, we weren't according to the Haitian urban vernacular in the neighborhoods where we were working. And as I said before, there was no room for expansion. People who live informally are, as you noticed, as you've been mapping today as well, are constantly transforming their homes. And these original buildings that we put there did not allow for this. And then the most important thing is that our response was just too slow. So our conclusion was that we shouldn't really be providing housing. Even though our donor had collected money from the Dutch people to rebuild houses. So we had to kind of go back and re-educate our donor to say we shouldn't really be providing houses. This is not where the gap is. What we really should be doing is a type of knowledge transfer. So we had knowledge of how to build in an earthquake-safe way, which the people didn't. We had budget, which we had to spend in 2 years, and the people didn't. So it was more a matter of transferring knowledge and transferring money. That was where the gaps were. So we started, like Akbar mentioned in his introduction, an owner-driven housing process. Okay. Which meant that, so this is images from the owner-driven housing process. Which basically meant that we went out to every single household and together with them designed their dream house. And maybe we didn't have full funding for everyone's dream house, but at least it was designed. And when it came to the plot, we can make sure that the expansion was allowed for. The people themselves, the household themselves, they engaged their own masons and supervised the construction. What we did, so what we did was to transfer cash and to train all masons in the community and to train all households. We trained the masons for obvious reasons. They were the ones who were going to construct the houses. But we also trained the households, because the households were the ones who supervised the construction. This is how it was traditionally done in these communities. So it was very important that they could know what a good block, concrete block was, and what a not good concrete block was. So we were teaching key, like simple rule of thumbs. So for example, if you take a concrete block, you drop it from waist height, and if it splits into more than 3 pieces, you shouldn't buy it, you shouldn't build with it. So these very simple messages we were distributing through the householders, but also the masons. And in terms of the cash transfer wasn't done all at once. The cash transfer was done in stages. So the first cash transfer was done for enough funds to build the foundations, so to dig and pour the foundations. Then we had trained the governmental engineers, the engineers who worked for the government, to come out and do those inspections. And if the inspection said these foundations have been poured in the right way, we would release another tranche of money. And in this way, the millions of funds that we had with us in our project did not end up with the big construction companies where we would normally procure. We would procure sand and it would come in big lorries. And here, because it went to the householders themselves, they bought from the local sand providers and the local block makers, also helping their reconstruction after the disaster, the reconstruction of their livelihoods. The other thing that owner-driven housing allows for is the fact that households themselves can add funds. So they're not restricted to the funding that we come with. But if we had 1,500 US dollars per house, and if they had $300, they could add it, and maybe we could build the bathroom, or maybe we could build the second floor. So it becomes more a collaborative process in this way also. And then maybe just to, I think this is the final slide, just the activities of the outsider. So we as architects, in this case, we were working for an NGO. We didn't construct. We co-designed. We transferred cash. We monitored quality, both in terms of construction and design. And we transferred our knowledge, our professional knowledge, to people who asked for it. And we also worked a lot with security of tenure to make sure that people were safe to stay where they were rebuilding. Every house looked unique, exactly according to the people's own needs. Yeah. Some of the images just to give you an idea. It's just a quick run-through of our response. If there are any questions or comments or... Everyone is zonked. Also, if there's questions, we will be with you tomorrow when we go on the site visit.
Yeah, could you please speak more about triangulating that Akbar spoke earlier?
Mm-hmm.
Could you please explain more about that?
Now, I didn't hear what Akbar said, but it has, at least for me, it has to do with making sure that if you hear it once, that you revisit it many times. And also accepting that people live in different realities. Having a community as your client means that if there's 100 people living in your community, you have 100 different realities. And how do you then respond to it? So to really understand you go and ask the same question to many different types of people to make sure that you don't just accept the first answer and build your response on that. Was there anything in particular, or? Okay.
Yeah, when we were discussing the rebuild opportunities in Kerala as well, and when there was this discussion about giving funds to the individual owners who want to rebuild, there was one criticism was whether they will be rebuilding the exact problem again. You know, so what is your take there? Like, were there enough research on what were the problems of the society which existed there, and whether the processes helped them to rebuild the problems again, or whether there was a negotiation to actually overcome the cultural, social, and physical problems that was existing there.
Yeah.
The romance of the owner-driven problem, which is truly understood, but how do you negotiate the other issue there?
Okay, 'cause my focus here was on the technical, just to simplify for tonight. But we had a parallel community development process going on, which was actually in the lead. When I was the manager in this project, and I removed the technical people, the technical teams from having, how do I describe it? From decision making, and built the social team, the people who had a greater social understanding of the context, as the ones who were bridging between the community and the people who were our donors. So that link became shorter, and the technical people, so we had engineers, we had architects, and also lawyers, were invited in to solve specific technical problems. So it wasn't a technically driven process, it was a socially driven process. Making sure that to make sure that technical problems are not rebuilt is easier than making sure that the social problems are not. And we also learned it the hard way, in Haiti. As I mentioned to one of the students this morning, is that one thing that's very important for us as outsiders is to understand the power dynamics within a community. Because you can come in and totally reshape those, and actually leaving the community in a poorer state than when you entered. So it's very important to have the social leading the technical, in my opinion. And especially as outsiders, to have people who are who are bridging between my not knowing and the community. So I don't think that I know. There's other people vetting it before it comes to more senior stuff.
Not just the technical thing. You have a master plan before you allow them, which had social spaces and.
So I didn't talk about this at all, but we saw it as an opportunity. So not only to map the community to, it's called adressage. When you start giving people addresses, it gives them more access to services. If you don't have an address, you can't phone for an ambulance. If you don't have an address, you can't. In some countries, you can't vote because you can't get the ID card, etc. So the first thing was to help the community map themselves. We did it together with the youth. And then we saw it as an opportunity that half the buildings were down, and to be able to renegotiate the space. And this took a lot of time, but so this upheld our housing component, but we thought it was so important that the housing component had to wait. And when a household wanted to reconstruct, they applied somehow to the urban planners to say, I want to reconstruct my home here. And the urban planners would say, would either go negotiate with the family and say maybe you could move, or because we would like to make this passage wider, we would like to, the garbage collection vehicles need to pass for, so all this was negotiated as well before the housing.
Usually post-disaster, the people wouldn't have not only lost their structure and the wealth and the house they had, but they would have lost their families with whom they emotionally connected, and also with the space how they live with those people. How do we approach in such situation? There'll be multiple layers to look into. How do we approach when there are multiple layers to look into?
In particular, because they have just been through, like, do you mean emotionally how to talk to people when they are been hit by a disaster? Or?
Not emotionally how to talk, not only just talk, but whatever design we do, which relates back to them. Like, how do we design looking into all these layers? Like, sometimes the typology may not work exactly the way it used to work before, but they relate more to what they lived in before, the typology that was there before.
But nearly, at least in my experience, nearly all households have a vision ahead. And people are amazingly, they bounce back and see they're very able to talk about the future that they would want for their family and their neighborhood, even in these very difficult circumstances. And the other thing I think is important here is that Akbar and my work, we don't come in the days after the disaster. So we don't come in when other agencies or other professionals or the government is there to save lives. Then shelter, and it's more about survival. Then maybe people are not thinking more than one day ahead. But when we come in, it's usually some months after. People are very much already actively going back to work, trying to understand how they will build their future. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
How long did you take to arrive at such a bold decision of actually not designing the building itself and letting the people build themselves? How confident you were that it will work? Like, you have been assigned to do a task and you have completely changed the situation.
There were I think I personally felt confident to do it because I deeply down felt, my gut was telling me we were not giving the people of this community the right service. We could do it better. So that gave me the confidence. But there were, first of all, our Haitian colleagues didn't believe in cash transfers at all. They say, you white people who've arrived here, you don't know our people. If you give them money, they will buy a motorbike. Yeah? They will not build their house. So that was the first challenge, was to kind of convince our colleagues that, no, we should at least try. We should at least try. And then the other, the more difficult, I'm not sure if it's difficult, but the ones that move slower, so the donors, the people who had allocated this money for the reconstruction of Haiti, they really wanted to rebuild every house that had gone down. They wanted to rebuild it. And we would argue that this is maybe not the right response, because some people can rebuild, and they will rebuild according to the standards themselves. maybe some of the money should be allocated also for infrastructure, for schooling, for other things that were community priorities. So it was a process of convincing the budget holders that we wanted to divide up the funding in a different way. Also, owner-driven housing is cheaper than if you built everything from the NGO's point of view. So you have some budget, you end up with more budget for other things. So there was a process of coming up with the arguments to be able to convince our donor. Yeah. And how long it took, I think we were there, we had 2.5 years to spend, we had 10 million euros, so quite a lot of money, far too much money. This is also very common in international response, that we have too much money and too little time. So we also had the pressure of we had to keep building houses, even though we were re-strategizing. But as long as we kept rebuilding houses, our donors were happy with us, and we could take this shift.
We are also going to design for people who are affected by such a disaster. So what do you think that we should take into consideration, most important things that we should take into consideration?
I think the community will tell you. I think it's is to be aware of your own position within the process.